They said she had nothing but patience, as if that were a flaw. Kaina walked through the village with her chin lifted, not high, not defiant, but lifted just enough to keep the tears from falling. At 25, most women in her village had long been married, had suckling children tied to their backs and land of their own to tend. Kaina had none of that. What she had was skin the color of river clay, a voice soft as fermented honey, and a heart that waited without complaint. People mistook that waiting for weakness. They didn't know patience was a weapon too. Her father, Alyamo, once roared through battles with a carved spear and braided beard that frightened even the colonizers. In his prime he had been feared, then respected. Now he coughed through the nights and bartered goats for cassava flour. A wound from an old war had twisted his back and fate had twisted his pride. When Far's family came to speak of marriage, it should have been a moment of honor. Instead, Alyamo had only one thing to offer in return: a calabash of polished cowrie shells. Cowrie shells. In a village where other men gave yam barns, gold trinkets, goats, or at least bolts of cloth, Alyamo offered seashells from a shoreline he'd never seen. The whispers began even before the gourd was opened. They spread like heat across the market stalls, winding through women's braids and men's laughter. Some laughed loud. Others shook their heads in disappointment. "She's beautiful, yes, but beauty doesn't feed a man," said one woman near the well. "Maybe Faru will marry her out of pity," added another, "or perhaps he needs someone obedient." Faru did not pity her. Not openly. He was a man of sharp cheekbones, clean robes, and ambition that didn't fit inside village borders. He had plans to trade with the northern buyers, to build a compound that would be remembered. Kaina didn't fit those plans, not with cowrie shells and a silent tongue. But he agreed to marry her anyway. When they sat under the irako tree to sign the betrothal lines, Faru's eyes barely met hers. He held the reed pen like it offended him. Kaina said nothing. Her fingers rested gently on her lap, calm as lake water. If she noticed his tension, she gave no sign. That night, as tradition demanded, Kaina danced in front of the elders with a wrapper tied around her waist and a small dish of palm oil cupped in her palms. Her mother was gone, passed away during the Harmattan 2 years earlier, so her auntie adjusted her beads and whispered, "Smile, girl. If you must suffer, suffer with grace." Kaina smiled. Not because of the advice, but because she saw no need to chase people's approval. What she feared wasn't shame. It was the bitterness that comes when you let shame define you. On her wedding morning, the air was heavy with scent: roasted yams, fried plantain, perfume made from crushed hibiscus. But over it all hung the stench of judgment. Guests arrived late, some deliberately avoiding eye contact. The bridegroom's relatives sat stiff, as if unsure whether to clap or sneer. A few even whispered cruelly, "This is not a real wedding, only a mercy." Far's mother didn't veil her disdain. She had begged her son to choose another, someone whose family brought land, not seashells. But Far was stubborn, or perhaps curious. What kind of woman accepts humiliation with bowed head and still walks tall? The ceremony was brief. Kaina was draped in indigo, the dye leaving traces on her fingers like ink. The drummers played, but half-heartedly. The only sound Kaina held onto was her father's breathing behind her, slow, cracked, but present. She leaned slightly toward him when the final blessing was given. His eyes shimmered, not from joy, but from knowing this was all he had left to give. When the sun began to fall, Kaina climbed into Faru's cart without needing to be called. She didn't cry. She didn't glance back. She just sat with the cowrie shell necklace now tightened around her throat, her mother's final gift, and whispered something no one else heard. "Let them laugh now. Let them speak my name in confusion later." The journey to Faru's compound was long and silent. He didn't speak and she didn't expect him to. She simply watched the trees bend in the wind like women learning how to endure. When they arrived, she stepped down, adjusted her wrapper, and walked in ahead of him. The house she entered was beautiful. Walls painted with old ancestral symbols. Pots lined neatly in corners. But inside, the air felt colder than the wind outside. Faru's sisters looked up at her with crooked smiles. His mother didn't rise to greet her. No one said welcome. Kaina turned to Faru and softly asked where she should put her things. He motioned to a small hut behind the main compound. "Separate? Not with him. Not yet. Until I know you," he said without emotion. "Until I understand what kind of woman you are." She nodded once, turned, and walked to the small hut. Not with anger, not with hurt, but with intention. If this was her starting point, then she would make it count. That night, while frogs sang outside and the compound's laughter rose around her without including her, Kaina sat alone, grinding cassava with bare hands. Her fingers bled from the rough stone. Still she hummed. Not out of joy. Out of clarity. Let them whisper. Let them point. A woman with nothing but cowries and patience had entered their lives, and they would learn too late that the price of peace was not paid in gold, but in the endurance of a woman who refused to break. Cana woke before the sun, her feet already on the floor before the cock's second cry. Her small hut behind the main compound was dry but empty, no cooking fire, no woven mats, no welcoming warmth. Just a clay pot of water and her mother's old wrapper folded carefully beside it. She washed in silence, tied her hair back, and wrapped herself in dignity. When she stepped into the courtyard of Faru's family home, the breeze shifted. Not the wind itself, but the way people moved when they saw her. Faru's mother, Mama Dunka, stood near the hearth, arms folded beneath her breast, watching every movement like a hawk. Her eyes, shaped like old secrets, did not blink when she saw Cana sweep the threshold before anyone else stirred. "Does she think sweeping earns her place?" whispered the older sister Lami, loud enough for Cana to hear. "She should be sweeping the river for more shells," chuckled the younger one, barely 17 and full of bile. Cana kept sweeping. She had expected resistance, but not the sheer pettiness. The compound's rhythm became a lesson in endurance. Every day she folded wrappers, pounded yam, carried water from the edge of the bush, and knelt to greet people who barely nodded back. At meals she was served last and never with meat. Her husband, Faru, barely looked her way during supper. He had stopped calling her by name. Instead, he issued instructions like a merchant ordering from a dusty ledger. "Boil the leaves but don't overcook them. Why is there no oil in the stew today? Ask Mama Dunka before using anything from the storage room." She obeyed. Not because she feared him, but because she was watching. Faru wore pride like a second skin. The Cowrie dowry had wounded him in places he didn't speak of. He had expected admiration when he married, the kind that came when a man took a wife of status. Instead he was mocked in hushed tones. "Ah, Faru is so generous, he married a girl whose bride price could fit in a child's palm. Maybe she knows magic. That's how she got him." Even his friends changed. They no longer lingered after meals. They teased him too much. And Faru, burdened by their laughter, turned that weight toward Cana. But she watched. She watched how his jaw clenched before he spoke to his mother. She saw how his fingers tapped 3 times when anxious. She knew he scratched behind his ear when he wanted to hide frustration. Cana studied him not to flatter him, but to understand. She was building a map. Quietly. On the 5th evening, as dusk bled purple across the sky, Cana found the young servant girl crying behind the cooking hut. Her name was Naya, barely 15, barefoot and bruised from Mama Dunka's flying ladle. Cana knelt beside her and placed a calabash of cool water between them. "The world does not hate you," she said softly. "Only the house you live in." Naya looked up, startled by kindness. That was how it began. From that night, the two became shadows of each other. Naya taught Cana which herbs Faru's mother liked in her soup. Cana shared leftover porridge with her after lights went out. They spoke in whispers, communicated with glances. Naya became Cana's unseen hands, and Cana, for the first time in that compound, found someone who looked at her without judgment. Still, the mockery never stopped. During a women's gathering in the courtyard, Lami made a comment that sliced the air like a machete. "My mother says Cana must have tied a spell to those cowries. Otherwise, why would Faru choose a woman whose dowry can't buy even a chicken?" The women burst into laughter, loud and sharp. Cana, who had just poured water into the gourd for tea, did not flinch. She turned, walked to Lami, and offered her the cup with a graceful bow. "May the one whose dowry is heavy carry her joy without envy." Silence. Then a few smirks. One older woman snorted into her drink, amused. Lami turned red with embarrassment but said nothing. That night, Naya whispered, "You strike without raising your voice." Cana didn't reply. But her eyes flickered with something new, not anger, not revenge, strategy. Faru remained a storm cloud, sometimes offering mild conversation, mostly lost in thought. One night, after returning from a visit to the nearby trading village, he sat in the courtyard long after dinner. Cana brought him a bowl of hot broth. He didn't look at her but accepted it. After a long pause, he muttered, "You don't ask for anything." She sat a few feet away and replied, "Asking from a man who is ashamed of his own home brings no peace." He looked at her then for the first time in weeks. "You think I'm ashamed?" She met his eyes and said gently, "I know it." He stared, unsure whether to be offended or impressed. Before he could answer, she rose, left the empty calabash behind and walked away, leaving him with his soup, his silence and his bruised pride. The next morning he didn't speak to her. But he didn't ignore her either. When Mama Dunka snapped at Kana for adding too much pepper to the okra, Faru said quietly, "She did as I told her." It was small. But it was a shift. In that compound where love was not given, Kana began to earn space, not through anger or arguments, but by knowing when to bend and when to bow without breaking. She wasn't just surviving. She was building something invisible. And the house that mocked her was starting to learn that obedience can be louder than defiance, and patience, when sharpened, can become the sharpest blade of all. The flames reached for the sky like angry spirits. It was just past midnight when the screaming began, sharp, panicked, cracking through the night like wood under pressure. The barn at the edge of Faru's compound, where sacks of dried maize, millet and trading goods were stored, had caught fire. Smoke billowed thick and black, clawing at the moon. Villagers ran with buckets, shouting commands and prayers at the same time. Kana had been asleep. But the moment the air shifted, she knew. Fire has a sound that is more than crackle. It has purpose. She rushed from her hut barefoot, cloth tied hastily around her chest, and joined the others, forming a line from the well. Faru was already there, shirtless and wild-eyed, directing everyone like a man possessed. Flames licked at the barn's roof, which collapsed with a groan that silenced the courtyard for a moment. Then the panic resumed. By dawn the fire was gone. And so was the barn. The ground was covered in ash, twisted wood, and the reeking scent of burned palm oil. Some of Faru's trade sacks had exploded from the heat. Dried shea nuts, bags of ginger and folded cotton from the north, gone. The village gathered quickly. Tragedy traveled faster than news. Neighbors came to offer help. But help was always accompanied by questions. How did the fire start? Was the lantern left burning? Did someone curse the goods? Mama Dunka's voice was sharp. There were no lanterns. And Faru always locks that barn at dusk. Lami stepped forward, arms folded, tone too innocent. Perhaps not everyone was happy in this house. Whispers started like drips from a leaky roof. She came with cowries. Maybe she brought bad luck. She stays too quiet. That silence hides things. Her people used to make love potions, remember? Faru stood still, his face unreadable. Then his gaze slowly shifted to Kana. She stood near the back, hands still covered in soot, her wrapper streaked with water and ash. She didn't speak. Her eyes met his, and for a second something passed between them, not anger, not sadness. Something older. Something from the days when trust was still possible. "You," he said loud enough for all to hear. "Did you do this?" Gasps rang out. Kana didn't blink. "No. That barn was everything," he continued, voice trembling with fury. "The trade, the future I built, the deals I negotiated. Gone. And it started after I brought you here. My shame wasn't enough, you had to burn my work too?" Kana didn't flinch. "I did not set fire to your dreams. Only you can do that." The courtyard went still. That line cut through the smoke like a blade. Mama Dunka opened her mouth to curse her, but the village elder, who had just arrived, raised a hand. "Faru," the elder said calmly. "Accusation must ride on proof, not pride." Faru didn't answer. His pride had already mounted the horse and galloped too far. News reached her father's ears by sunset. Alyamo came, walking slow, leaning on a carved stick, shame painted across his face. He stood beside his daughter and bowed his head before the crowd. "If my child has done wrong," he said hoarsely, "I accept the shame. I did not raise her to destroy." He turned to go, but Kana grabbed his arm gently. "Baba," she whispered, "you raised me to build." That night no one spoke to her. The compound moved around her like she was a ghost. Even Naya was kept away, scolded for breathing near her. Kana spent the night outside under the mango tree, with the wind brushing her cheeks and the fire's aftersmoke still lingering in her lungs. But she did not cry. The next morning, while everyone else mourned and murmured, Kana picked up a hoe. She walked to the remains of the barn and began clearing the ash plank by plank. Her fingers burned. Her arms ached. But she kept going. She swept, cleaned, sorted. Saved what hadn't burned to dust. Picked nails from the rubble. Stacked firewood that still held shape. She made no announcements, gave no explanations. 3 days passed. Still no one joined her. On the 4th day, a figure stood watching her from a distance. Old, thin, wrapped in a faded shawl, with eyes too sharp to ignore. It was Mami Aho, the widow who lived on the far edge of the village. Once a respected herbalist, now forgotten after her only son died in the Great Migration. No one visited her. Most feared her. Cana did not. That evening, as she washed her arms in the stream, the widow approached quietly. She carried a leather pouch. "I saw you picking truth from ashes," Mommy Aho said. "You have the hands of a rebuilder." Cana nodded, wary. "Only the hands, not the voice. Sometimes hands speak louder. You did not defend yourself." "I don't waste breath where fire already burned." Mommy Aho smiled. "Good. Then you know how to make ashes useful." She pulled from her pouch a tightly rolled scroll. The leather was cracked, the twine brittle. Inside were markings, old hand-drawn diagrams of roots, barks, leaves and their meanings. Herbal combinations not taught to just anyone. Trade secrets of women who once ruled the healing market. "Take this," Mommy Aho said. "I can't carry it where I'm going." Cana stared. "Why me?" "Because fire cannot burn what grows from the earth. And because this village will learn, they did not marry a girl with cowries. They married a woman with seeds." As the sun set, Cana stood under that same mango tree holding the scroll. Behind her, the barn remained a skeleton. But in her hands now was something else, something greater than what had been lost. She did not know who set the fire. But she knew this: when you walk through smoke and come out with purpose, you are no longer the accused. You are the answer they don't see coming. By the time the moon was full again, Cana was walking into forests before dawn, her feet silent, her hands remembering. The scroll from Mommy Aho wasn't just a gift. It was a new language, one written in leaves, in barks, in the soft oil of crushed roots. She had memorized half of it already. The widow, thin as a reed and sharper than any blade, taught with riddles. The leaf that stings can also soothe. The child that cries for no reason may hear something you do not. Cana listened. She never missed a day. While Faru's compound continued to treat her like smoke after fire, there but unwelcome, Cana grew more certain of her place in the world. It wasn't in the way they saw her. It was in the way the forest whispered to her fingers, the way her satchel grew heavier with herbs and her heart lighter with knowledge. It began with small things. A woman with a twisted ankle from falling at the river. Cana mixed a poultice of ground cassia and warm red oil, bound it tight and whispered instructions. The swelling faded in 2 days. A child with night sweats and coughing fits. She made a syrup of boiled cola bark, lime peel and a pinch of ginger. He stopped coughing by the week's end. The whispers started again, but this time with a different tone. "That Cowrie bride, she cured my daughter. She never asks for much. Only a few shells or a thread of cloth. She doesn't look like a healer, but her hands know." Women started knocking softly on her hut door at night. Not from Faru's compound, those still sneered behind closed lips. But from the outer homes, from villages a half-day's walk away. They brought offerings, cowries, dried fish, carved beads. It wasn't much, but it was more than what Faru gave her. She kept it hidden. In a calabash buried beneath the roots of the mango tree. Her earnings quiet and clean. Cowries that meant something now, not because of marriage but because of healing. One morning Faru saw her returning from the bush. Her basket was full of strange leaves. He frowned. "You wake before the roosters. What are you doing out there?" "Learning," she answered simply. "From who?" "That widow." She didn't reply. But her eyes didn't drop. "I hope you're not selling yourself with your healing." "People talk." She tilted her head. "Let them. They talk when I'm silent. They talk when I speak." Faru looked away, jaw tight. He hated that she no longer trembled around him. And yet, a part of him, small and buried, was curious. She had survived his silence, his mother's scorn, a house that refused to open its doors. And now, somehow she was being sought. That very evening, the house trembled again. Mama Dunka fell ill. It began with sweating and shaking. Then came the vomiting. Her face turned pale. Lami tried every powder from the market, every prayer from the shrine. Nothing worked. The compound was thick with incense and panic. Faru sent a messenger to the nearest known healer. They arrived, sniffed the air, touched Mama Dunka's forehead and left. "It's poison," they whispered. "Or punishment." Faru clenched his fists. "Fix it or don't speak." Another healer came. Then another. None stayed. Meanwhile, Cana sat in her hut. Quiet. She had already seen the signs. The way Mama Dunka's feet had swelled, the tremor in her fingers, the darkening of her lips. She had read it before, on the scroll. It was not poison. It was the bitter root sickness, something that entered the body when certain herbs were mixed wrongly with palm wine, often out of vanity or pride. She could treat it. She knew the combination. But no one had asked. Until the fourth night. Faru stood outside her hut, his shadow bleeding into the walls. "She's dying," he said, voice ragged. "They all failed." Kaina looked up. "And you?" He didn't answer. "She cursed my marriage," she continued. "Made jokes of my cowries. Called me a visitor in my own home. She's still my mother," Faru said through clenched teeth. Kaina stood, picked up her satchel, and followed him without another word. Mama Dunka lay motionless, her chest barely rising. The sisters moved aside when Kaina entered. Naya brought her water and helped grind the herbs into a soft paste. Kaina worked quickly, crushed morina leaves with shea oil, added a dash of fermented kola sap, mixed in powdered okazi root. She rubbed it into the soles of Mama Dunka's feet, behind her ears and under her tongue. Then she bathed her forehead with warm cinnamon leaf water. The room was silent, heavy. That night no one slept. By dawn Mama Dunka's breathing had steadied. By noon she opened her eyes. Weak, confused, but alive. No one spoke, not even Lami. Faru stood in the doorway, watching his wife tend to the mother who once declared her unfit for their house. "Why did you save her?" he asked that evening as Kaina rinsed her satchel. "Because healing does not ask if someone deserves it," she said. "It only asks if they need it." He looked at her, truly looked, and something inside him cracked. That night she returned to her hut alone. But she didn't feel alone. The woman who had entered that house with nothing now held the power of life in her hands. And for the first time since her Cowrie dowry was mocked, her name began to carry a different weight. Not pity. Not gossip. But quiet, earned reverence. The rain hadn't touched the land in 3 weeks. Cracks split across the red soil like scars refusing to heal. It was planting season and tempers like the dust rose quickly. The land in question was a narrow strip between Faru's clan and Kaina's father's people. A slope where sweet yams grew well, where the soil remembered old feet and sacred rituals. No one knew who first planted there, but both sides claimed blood had once blessed that ground. It began with footprints. One morning, a boy from Kaina's old village wandered into the strip with a hoe. Faru's uncle Aika chased him off, shouting insults that twisted into curses. The boy ran home with more fear than explanation. The next day men from Kaina's side arrived with machetes, not drawn but shown. It was enough to wake old wounds. By the end of the week, someone's goat was missing. Then a boundary tree was found axed down. That night, 3 huts were stoned under cover of darkness. In the morning, Faru's cousin had a split lip and Kaina's father, Alyamo, stood at the edge of the field with fire in his eyes and a spear he hadn't lifted in 10 years. Colonial agents heard the whispers of tribal unrest. They came with rifles and paper orders. They didn't care whose yam grew where. They wanted quiet. So they arrested 6 men, 3 from each village. Alyamo was among them. Kaina heard the news while returning from a healing run to the next village. She didn't cry. But something inside her shifted like a pot over sudden flame. At the council meeting held under the central Irako tree, the elders gathered. Old men with heavy beads and heavier pride spoke in loud voices and pounding canes. "This is an insult. We've farmed that land since our grandfathers walked upright. They took our elders, our warriors. This is not peace, it is war in another form." The colonial men asked for silence, but silence is not justice. Faru sat in the circle, his face stiff. Though the dispute came from his clan's border, he said little. Perhaps he knew his voice would only make things worse. Perhaps he was listening for a voice he never used to trust. And then that voice rose. "I will pay the price." The murmurs cut. All eyes turned. Kaina stepped into the circle, calm as morning fog. Her wrapper was simple. Her hands were stained from herbs. Her eyes held no fear. "The agents have demanded peace money," she continued. "The village cannot afford what they ask. But I can." A scoff. Then a laugh. Then silence again. "With what?" barked one of the elders. "Cowries from your cursed dowry?" Kaina nodded. "Yes. Cowries from my cursed dowry. Cowries from healing children whose mothers never thanked me. Cowries from treating wounds after your last foolish clash. Cowries earned from work, not from pride." The elder's mouth closed. Faru sat up straighter. "I will also pay with herbs," she continued. "Medicine for their soldiers. Barks and oils they buy in markets far from here. I have enough to barter for peace, if they value peace more than vengeance." One of the younger men stood. "Why should a woman pay for a man's quarrel?" Kaina looked at him steadily. "Because the land does not belong only to warriors. It feeds our children, heals our sick, and buries our bones. And because men have spoken for too long while women bury the consequences." The air was still. Then came the head elder's voice, low, raspy, careful. And if your offer fails? Cana took a slow breath. Then I will sit in the prison beside my father, and this land will know what it costs to ignore a peaceful hand. That night, she emptied the calabash beneath her mango tree. Every cowrie she had earned from healing the sick, every piece of cloth, every dried pepper pod and bundle of bark, she packed them into baskets. With Naya's help, she walked them to the post where the colonial agents waited. There, in the presence of men who couldn't pronounce her name, she bartered with poise. She offered medicine they didn't understand, leaves that soothed the fever of the white officers' sons, oils that warded off sleeping sickness. She spoke in quiet, precise English, taught by Mami Aho before her passing. The agent in charge, a sunburnt man who thought all villagers looked the same, squinted. And you're giving this, for what? For the men you took, she replied. And for land that feeds both tribes. He looked amused. You think these leaves and seashells are worth that? She smiled just barely. Ask your doctor. He's been using my herbs for months. By morning the 6 men were released. No official document explained why. No soldier gave credit. But the peace held. When Ayamo walked back into the village he looked older, thinner, but when he saw Cana standing with the empty calabash he whispered, "You did what no spear ever could." Later that week the council gathered again, this time with fewer arguments. Farah stood beside Cana. When one elder said her actions were unorthodox, Farah replied, "So is surviving in a house that never welcomed her, and turning that house into a home that saved us all." The irony didn't escape the village. The girl once mocked for her cowries had now paid the debt of peace. Not with gold. Not with rage. But with the power of a woman who knew that healing and justice sometimes were the same face. And the land at last was silent. Not from fear. But from the kind of peace that only grows when someone dares to stop the shouting. The sun rose gently that morning, not like a warrior with fire, but like a mother with open arms. Cana stepped outside with a calabash balanced on her head and a satchel across her back. Her feet moved not with urgency, but with understanding. She was not walking for herself. She was walking to pay a peace debt the men could not carry. From one village to the next she moved like a whisper. The same girl they had laughed at, the one married with cowrie shells and called shameful, now arrived with bundles of crushed leaves, bitter roots, healing barks and messages of hope tucked in every pouch. At the first village she met a midwife who had once called her dowry, dust disguised as tradition. Cana gave her a rare oil that soothed swelling during childbirth. The woman sniffed it once, then again, and softened. Cana spoke gently. "I ask for no payment. But if your husband speaks at the next council, remind him that wounds are not healed by fire." The midwife nodded slowly, her fingers curling around the gift. At the next stop she met the wife of the chief, whose son had suffered from a recurring fever. Cana pulled out leaves crushed with charcoal and mango bark. "Brew this for 3 nights, she said, "and the fever will not return." The woman watched her carefully. "You come without asking, but you leave a gift. Why?" Cana looked out at the fields beyond the village. "Because I was once poor in their eyes. And now I hold something none of them can price, peace in my palms." She moved on. At the third village she approached a colonial interpreter, a tall man who dressed like both a clerk and a chameleon. He had mocked her father once. But she came not for revenge. She laid out a small bag of roots and herbs for malaria, the same kind the colonial officers paid silver for at the coastal markets. She spoke softly in English. "I ask you to whisper one sentence during your next translation. Let the women speak. They carry the peace the men drop." He blinked. "They won't listen to a woman." She tilted her head. "Then they will listen to the man who says the woman is right." He took the herbs. And her words. Behind her shadows moved. Farah followed in silence that day. He had heard from his youngest sister that Cana was leaving the compound daily, sometimes barefoot, always returning late. At first he thought it was foolish. Then he worried it was rebellion. But now, walking a distance behind, he saw something he could not name. Children ran to her, mothers welcomed her. Elders bowed slightly. Chief's guards let her pass. Her steps were light, her greetings warm, but it was not kindness that earned their respect. It was usefulness. It was trust. It was something deeper than his pride had ever let him recognize. She didn't return home with coins. She returned with promises. By the time the final council meeting was called, the village expected her. They did not know what she would say, but they knew she had something the rest of them lacked. An answer not written in rage. Cana walked into the gathering ground wearing her simplest wrapper. But around her waist hung pouches, Small medicine bags filled with healing roots, each tied with cowries that clicked like soft thunder. She set them down before the elders. One for each of the 6 who'd been jailed. One for the colonial man who signed their release. One for each village whose land had felt the threat of fire. These are not only herbs, she said. Each one carries meaning. She held up the first bag. This one has the bark of the tree struck by lightning. It teaches us that what breaks can also grow stronger. The elders leaned in. This one carries dried ginger and goat's hair, a reminder that pain and persistence often live together. She paused. Then, without raising her voice, these are the dowries I offer. Not for marriage, but for peace. A silence thicker than war hung over them. Then the interpreter, the one who once dismissed her, stepped forward. The colonial agent says, if no more unrest occurs by the next moon, the land boundaries can remain shared. Another silence. But this one began to ease. The head elder, old enough to remember 3 famines, stood. You were bought with cowries, he said, his voice neither mocking nor soft. And now you've turned them into the price of peace. He turned to the others. Who among us has traded more? Who among us has walked farther? None answered. Farah stepped forward, something caught between his throat and pride. She walked with nothing but roots and good hands, he said slowly. She ended what we could not. The next day word spread like the harmattan wind. The war was off. The fields would remain open. The jailed men would not be taken again. And the girl whose dowry had been the village joke, had paid off a war without raising a weapon. Cana sat alone that evening, hands dusty from unpacking herbs, feet aching. Farah stood behind her, unsure if he should speak. At last he did. I followed you, he said. She did not turn. I saw the way they listened to you. You didn't fight me, Cana. You just walked away from the noise. She looked up at the stars. I didn't walk away, she said. I walked toward something bigger. And beside her, the wind whispered through the cowries, like applause from ancestors long silenced, finally heard. She carried no sword, only leaves. No soldiers, only steps. No map, only memory. But where others shouted, she listened. Where others threatened, she healed. Where others broke, she bound. And now when they tell the story, they do not say, a war was avoided. They say, a woman walked, and peace followed her feet. The rainy season came without warning, soaking the cracked earth, painting the air with the scent of mud and mango leaves. And with each drop that fell, something inside Faru began to soften, something he hadn't even known had hardened. He sat on the steps outside the hut one morning watching Cana in silence. She walked past him carrying a woven basket of dried herbs, her chin lifted, her steps silent, her back unbowed. She didn't glance his way, but she didn't avoid him either. Her presence was steady. Like the morning sun, it didn't ask for your attention, but you felt it warming everything around you. Farah thought of the man he used to be. The man who scoffed at her dowry. The man who accused her in front of his clansmen. The man who let her sleep alone for months while he burned with pride beside another fire. But now that pride had cooled, and all that was left were questions. His mother sat across from him one afternoon, her fingers working slowly on a bead bracelet. She hadn't spoken to him in weeks, just watched him the way a mother watches when a lesson is unfolding that no elder can teach. She saved me, she said simply. Farah looked up, startled. She knew I cursed your union. She knew I told you to choose differently. And still she laid the leaves beneath my tongue, held the cloth to my forehead, sat by me while I slept. Farah's mouth moved but no words came. His mother sighed. You were given a wife rich in spirit. But you wanted one rich in praise. He dropped his head. She continued, the one who walks with noise brings drama. The one who walks with peace brings legacy. Farah nodded slowly, the weight of her words heavy. He had measured Cana's worth by what the village whispered, by what the other men admired. But he had never truly seen her, not until she stood before the council and handed them war's ransom with a calmness he didn't possess. Days passed. He began watching her more closely. The way she organized her herbs. The way she soothed crying children with her smile. The way women leaned in when she spoke, like the wind had stopped just to hear her better. She still slept on the mat alone, separated from him by a silence he'd built with his own hands. But she moved like a queen, even in her solitude. Then came the fever. Faru had been returning from the eastern village, where he had tried to settle debts left by his late uncle. The rains had caught him on the way back and he arrived coughing, his body hot and trembling. He didn't ask for help. He couldn't. But Cana came anyway. She boiled roots and rubbed his chest with oil until the heat began to fall. She cooled his brow through the night. When he groaned in his sleep, she placed her hand over his heart and whispered words in the old tongue, words of comfort only the wives of healers knew. He opened his eyes on the third night. Her silhouette sat beside him, her fingers weaving a pouch by candlelight. He stared. "You haven't left," he rasped. She didn't stop weaving. "You're ill," she replied. He swallowed. "You don't owe me anything." This time she looked at him. "I didn't do it because I owe you. I did it because I promised myself that I would never let another person suffer in silence the way I once did." Her voice was calm, but something deep shimmered beneath it, something forged in fire, patience, and quiet pain. He looked away, then back at her. "You paid more than I ever could," he whispered. She blinked. "What do you mean?" "You paid in silence, in dignity, in service, in rejection, in ridicule. I was the husband, but you were the honor in this home. You saved my mother. You saved my name. You even saved my clan from shame, and I was a ghost in the house we were supposed to build together." Silence held the room. Then he reached out, slowly, uncertainly, his fingers brushing the hem of her wrapper. "I don't deserve your kindness," he said. She looked down at his hand, then at his face. "You're not asking for kindness," she said softly. "You're waking up." He let out a breath like someone shedding old skin. That night, for the first time, he asked her to sit closer. She did. They didn't speak much after that. She rubbed oil into his hands, and he watched her with the quiet awe of a man who finally saw not just his wife, but his mirror. The next morning when he woke, the fever had broken, but something else had settled in its place. Respect. And the first fragile seed of love. Not the love sung about in songs, nor the one praised at weddings, but the kind that grows between apology and healing, between shame and change. The kind of love that isn't loud, but true. Paw prints. Poetic reflection. Love does not always enter like a storm. Sometimes it creeps in through silence. When pride is tired, and guilt is honest. He did not fall for her beauty. He fell for her grace under fire, her dignity in rejection, her strength without noise. And when he finally saw her, not as his mistake, but as his mercy, he realized, some crowns are not worn on the head. Some are carried in how a woman walks, even when she walks alone. The sun rose gently over the village hills, lighting the rooftops with golden hush and soft promises. The air smelled of roasted yam, fresh hibiscus, and something rare, something unspoken. After months of fire, shame, arrests, and silent awakenings, the festival of forgiveness had finally arrived. It had been years since the elders agreed to revive it, but this time, it wasn't just to celebrate the end of a land feud. It was to mark the rise of something the village had never seen before, a woman who led with nothing but patience and healing in her hands. Cana stood in front of the carved wooden mirror in the widow's hut. Her long braids, twisted with care, were adorned with cowrie shells, each one representing a village she had visited, a child she had healed, a wound she had soothed. The widow stood behind her, tightening the last loop of her wrapper. "You carry the strength of our forgotten grandmothers today," the widow whispered. Cana nodded, her eyes misting but her spine tall. "And I carry their silence no longer." The drums began to speak outside, low and pulsing like the heart of the land. One by one, villagers poured into the central clearing. Children with chalked faces, elders in dyed robes, traders from nearby towns, even colonial officers stood watching the ceremony unfold. But everyone's eyes searched for her. And then she appeared. Cana walked barefoot, Cowrie swaying like wind chimes with each step. She walked not like a bride, not like a widow, but like a truth finally believed. Behind her, at a respectful distance, walked Faru. No longer the man who led with voice or violence, he now walked with lowered head and lifted heart. He was not ashamed. He was learning. The elders gathered under the talking tree, their walking sticks crossed beside them. The lead elder raised his hand, signaling for silence. "For many years," he began, "our mouth said a woman cannot hold power. But our land has spoken otherwise." He looked at Cana and then stepped aside. "Today, for the first time, a woman shall speak not as someone's wife, not as someone's daughter, but as a voice of the people." Gasps rippled. Some clapped. Others sat stunned. But Cana stepped forward without trembling. She carried no paper, no scroll, only the weight of her truth. She lifted her chin, scanning the faces of the very ones who once called her cursed, barren, and empty. "I was once the girl mocked for a dowry made of shells," she began. A few heads lowered. I was called a waste, a shadow, a shame. Faru blinked slowly, his jaw set, taking it all in. But when fire took what we all shared, I did not answer with fire. When my name was dragged in the dirt, I did not reach for revenge. I reached for roots, leaves, hands. She let the silence sit. Then she continued, her voice strong but soft. I learned that power is not how loud you can shout, but how deeply you can heal. That real peace does not begin when war ends, but when someone chooses to plant kindness in soil meant for bitterness. Murmurs spread. Eyes brimmed. I did not do it alone. The widow taught me. The women stood by me. Even those who once doubted me are now here, listening. And today I forgive. All of it. A hush swept over the field. The elders looked at one another. Then, one by one, the village women rose to their feet and began walking toward her. Some wept. Some held hands. All bowed slightly in respect. They formed a circle around her, their skirts touching the earth like petals. The widow stepped forward, placing a single red bead in Cana's palm. For every wound you did not return, you planted a medicine we all now use. Then, something no one expected, Faru stepped into the circle, went down on one knee and looked up at his wife. This time, he said, let me be your shadow. The village erupted in quiet gasps. No man had said such a thing in public. Cana reached out and helped him to his feet, not beneath her, not above her, but beside her. The lead elder lifted a carved staff. Then let this marriage be blessed again, not for land, not for pride, but for legacy. Drums began again, not war drums but celebration beats. The kind played when rains finally fall. As the sun dipped low, and the sky turned the color of forgiveness, Cana stood at the center of the clearing, the shells in her hair glinting like stars. Children danced around her. Women hummed healing songs. Faru stood beside her, not to lead, but to walk behind, to learn, to serve. That night, the village didn't just witness a festival. They witnessed a shift. A shift in what power could look like. A shift in how leadership could speak. A shift in how healing, not hate, writes history. She did not conquer with sword or shame. She conquered by not fighting battles beneath her. She stood in silence while they threw stones, and built altars of peace with the same stones. Her voice was once dismissed. Now it echoes beyond fire and field. She wore shells like armor. And her footsteps wrote new songs on the soil. And the one who once walked ahead of her now follows in reverence. For in a world obsessed with loud crowns, she wore hers quietly, woven in patience, stitched in grace. The breeze had changed. It no longer carried the sharp whispers of who Cana used to be. Instead, it brought laughter, high-pitched and playful, of little girls with shells braided into their hair. They skipped between mango trees, reenacting a story that had already become legend. She gave cowries and herbs, one girl said, hands on hips like a village elder. No, no, said another, correcting her with a dramatic sweep of her scarf. She ended a war. Their voices echoed across the compound, where Cana, now a woman of quiet grace and sturdy years, sat under the neem tree. Her fingers crushed dried leaves into a calabash. The scent of healing roots rose with the wind. A young apprentice beside her watched closely, copying her movements with trembling fingers. This one's for women who bleed too long after birth, Cana murmured. Should I add bark? Yes, but only after the mixture cools. It strengthens the body. The girl nodded, her forehead creased with concentration. Behind them, the midwifery hut stood like a monument, not grand in size but in spirit. Painted with murals of vines, cowries and women with open palms, it had become a place where healing met knowledge. Girls came from far-off villages to learn, not only how to mix leaves and chant soothing words, but how to lead with gentleness. Every few months, traders and travelers stopped by, asking if the Cowrie bride was real. And it was Faru, now weathered and humbled, who would smile and point proudly to the neem tree. You see her? He would say. That woman didn't buy me, she bought peace. Some laughed in disbelief. Some wrote it down. Others stayed just to hear her speak. When asked, Cana rarely told the full story. She let others tell it how they wished. But what she did offer, always, was a lesson. She would press a shell into a girl's hand and whisper, "This is not a price. It's a promise. Use it with kindness." There was something poetic about how the very thing that had once been mocked, the cowrie, was now worn with honor. Brides from all corners of the land placed shells in their hair, tied them into their belts, offered them at ceremonies as symbols of peace, patience and protection. No dowry was ever quite the same after Cana. And as for the village? It grew, not just in size but in soul. People still argued, still made mistakes, but they spoke of healing more than harm. Elders consulted Cana before declaring harsh punishments. Women leaned on her when childbirth stole their strength. Even those who had once gossiped about her, the loudest voices, the cruelest tongues, were now her patients, her students, her quiet admirers. One day, an old woman who had once called Cana a shameful bride approached the hut. Her eyes were cloudy with time. "I've come to say, thank you," she whispered. Cana held her hand gently. "Then stay a while. There's tea inside." That was her way. No grudge. No echo of old pain. Just a place at her table. Faru often sat beside her in the evenings, his hand resting over hers as she sorted seeds or told stories to the younger girls. "I once thought dowries were about wealth," he said one night. "And now?" she asked without looking up. "Now I think they're about courage." She smiled faintly. "Not mine alone. Everyone who believed with me, who traded healing instead of hurt, built this with me." Years passed. Trees grew taller. The midwifery hut expanded. Children named their daughters after Cana. And on the day she laid down for the last time, years and years after her wedding, her journey, her trials, she wore a crown of fresh cowries in her hair, placed there by her granddaughter. And across the region, villages rang their bells. Women gathered with shells in their hands. And they told the story not of a woman who fought, but of one who forgave. They didn't call her healer or teacher or even queen. They called her peace. She gave what others called worthless, and it became priceless. She was mocked for her patience, and it became her kingdom. They tried to name her with shame, but she rewrote the language with silence, grace, and rooted strength. Power did not sit in her hands. It bloomed where she walked. And now, every time a bride ties shells into her hair, they are not ornaments. They are memories. They are revolutions whispered in soft hands. For the girl they once pitied is now the mother of peace. They gave her cowries, because they thought that was all she was worth. Just shells. Just tokens. Just trinkets from the sea, tossed into her lap like an apology no one meant. But she gave them peace because she knew she was worth more. Not because they told her. Not because anyone affirmed it. But because her spirit whispered it in silence, every time she chose not to break. Every time she chose to build. She walked into a house that didn't want her. A home where her name felt foreign, where her footsteps echoed unwelcome, and her smile was met with closed doors and colder hearts. Yet somehow from cold ashes and harsh glares she lit a fire. She brewed healing with her hands, sowed kindness with her silence, and stitched patience into every crack of that crumbling roof. And built a home the village couldn't live without. Not because she fought loudly, but because she served quietly. Not because she begged for respect, but because she earned reverence. And when they called her weak for not shouting back, she planted medicine in the soil where insults had been thrown. Her dowry was mocked. Her cowrie shells called cheap, her offering seen as second-hand. But it outlived all the gold. Because gold cannot cure fevers. Gold cannot stop blood. Gold cannot end wars built on pride and wounded history. But her cowries did. Her patience, quiet, unwritten, unseen, became the bridge between two broken clans. No soldier marched it. No elder commanded it. Only a woman with nothing but faith and a pouch of herbs. She walked, barefoot, across borders where even men feared to tread. She faced war with salves instead of swords. She knelt before chieftains not with trembling but with purpose. And when they asked, "Who sent you?" she replied, "No one." But peace needed a mother. She spoke to women in whispers and healed children with touch. She bartered healing for harmony, roots for reconciliation, and left every village better than she found it. She gave the world no battle to remember, but a peace that would never be forgotten. And now, when peace sits in a village, it wears a crown of cowrie shells. When midwives sing birthing songs, they tie shells into the newborn's cloth. When brides walk to their new homes, their feet ring softly with shell bracelets, echoes of her journey. And when old men argue at councils, they lower their voices at the sight of shells, remembering the girl who made silence sacred. Because once a woman paid for silence with wisdom, for hatred with healing, for gossip with grace, for rejection with renewal. And the village, once laughing behind her back, now kneels before her legacy. No one carves her name in stone, but they carve it into their customs. No one wrote her history, but she wrote it in herbs, in midwives, in peace treaties sealed with shells instead of blood. She taught them that a woman's worth is not measured in gold or goats, but in how she gathers broken things and makes them whole again. She proved that power can be quiet, that leadership can be soft-spoken, that sometimes the strongest voice is the one that refuses to echo anger. She turned every curse into a crop, every insult into incense, every night of weeping into a morning of laughter in a hut she built with her own hands. She did not beg for love. She became love. She did not carry a weapon. She carried water, offering it to those who burned her first. And now, when little girls dance with shells in their hair, they are not playing. They are remembering. They are reliving. Every shell is a story. Every shell is a prayer. Every shell is a thank you, passed down from the bride who didn't fight for vengeance, but planted peace in its place. And one day, when she became old and gray, her back bent not from defeat but from bowing too often to serve, she looked upon her village not with pride but with peace. She had no enemies left. Only students. Only seeds. Only stories told at twilight under baobab trees. And when the final shell was placed in her hair, and her eyes closed for the last time, even the wind bowed. Even the birds fell silent. Even the fire crackled more gently. Because something holy had passed through that village. Something enduring. Something they never saw coming, yet now could never forget. Not a queen in jewels, but a woman in shells. If this story touched you, share it with someone who carries peace the way she did, with quiet strength. And remember, not every legacy is loud. Some are woven gently like cowrie shells in a girl's hair.